Hi, this is Sovereign Key, Lauda Leon,
And Eve Lorgen.
and we will be discussing today various elements of the system of sacrifice and the sacred feminine, the theft of the fire of the goddesses. We're going to be discussing original gods, the fallen, Sophia and the inversion. We're going to be looking at the Nephilim, giants, watchers, the ancient gods of Egypt. We're going to be compiling a lot of information with regards to what occurred at the beginning and has been utilized in theft of the goddesses, of the fire of the goddesses, ever since, creating essentially a planet or a world, a system of priestesses that have, in actuality, are being utilized as whores.
Yeah, but they don't know it. They think they're doing something good, and then they find out down the line.
Yes, that it's too late to get out.
Or they die in the process. So we're going to report on some of the things that clients have told us, and then fill it in with history of what we've known through history, along with some of the ancient Egyptian rituals and the ancient gods, and how that all ties together with some of the contemporary reports that I've had and that I've actually posted on my website a while ago. Things about the twin flame, fifth fire initiation, and certain kinds of hybrid beings, and the reptilian
and the Kundalini initiation, which is
and the astral, and how they program people to do this in the astral. And it actually all connects to the sacred priestess four things that's actually happening with certain bloodline of people, which we have identified and called the starfire blood. It happens more with the women, although the men can also have that quality in their blood as a bloodline trait. But this actually happens more with the women, and then they utilize them, and they would like to utilize them as the sacred priestess whores, and be able to couch it in terms and belief systems where they think they're actually doing a service to a higher spirituality. But in fact, I think there's something else going on that is a darker type of hijacking and a ritual sacrifice kind of thing that's going on.
Yes, and so these, from the very beginning, when we look at we're going to talk in terms of this very last cycle that we're in, because previous cycles to that we will go into later with regards to the beginning of the original fall and the splitting of Tiamat, which also caused this inversion to occur while everybody was put into a slumber, and the memory being swiped also from Sophia herself, from Tara.
Yeah, so there was one thing I just wanted to bring out that helped me understand some of basically what happened, and another way to understand this inversion split through, and I may be speculating here, right, on the Gnostic speculation of Sophia and how she came about as an aeon who descended into the lower realms, the material realms, and became the body of the earth. And there was a type of extreme trauma and terror and grief which she experienced, and then that basically split off from her, and she became like the lower Achamoth Sophia, which is kind of like an inversion, or how I see it, maybe is in a way that we could also understand it, would be a trauma split. So in, let's say, ritual abuse, MKUltra programming, for example, where they split the core person through an extreme trauma, and then those core splits may contain, let's say, the rage or the grief or the split off emotions, and then they may have an unawareness of who they really are and what they really split off from, and they're able to be used for their power and to control them as, let's say, the dark evil altar, or the dark evil witch, or the priestess. So I'm thinking that maybe something like this happened with the lower Sophia Achamoth, where her energy was inverted and used against her own fuller awareness, because she's actually a split off part that we're actually living on in the body of this, quote, earth. Something like that.
Yes, and we're also split off. Therefore, we're all experiencing the same trauma and the same PTSD and the same characteristics that relate to a fragmented memory or a fragmented membrane, where we're shielded from our own minds in consciousness, because the trauma has kept us in a state that is closest to it's almost a comatose state.
Yeah.
In many ways. So in this way, we are trying to rouse and awaken, although some of us come with more memory. Therefore, together we are able to connect more dots and actually do away with the falsehood of these teachings that they have here in history, education, which is the falsified version, even in terms of time.
Wow.
So the original hijacking that occurred, which is patriarchal, it was a patriarchal takeover on purpose. In the original hijacking that occurred with these frequencies, which manifested as different types of dominions, forces, principalities, be it demiurgic or the split off version or the antiverse version of the demiurge or of the original demiurge, because everything here is an inversion. So it is likely that we're dealing with the inverted part of the demiurge.
Wow.
In this hijacking. So when they did that, this patriarchal agenda came into effect because they needed to remove the power of the goddesses, as it was too great. See, originally, the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine were also ripped. And they experienced a division within themselves. So in the fall, not only was it the body herself, Sophia, Tiamat, that experienced this complete shattering, but it was the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine. And when that happened, that became inverted. In the inversion, the inverted aspect of the masculine is what decided to hijack and take over the feminine, the sacred feminine. When this occurred, the patriarchal agenda was to literally steal the essence of the fire of the goddesses. And the fire of the goddesses, the star fire, as many people call it, is literally an essence of creation itself, which can open portals, can do everything. It's like it is literally the gold essence of the fire of creation. So when the patriarchal forces had to come up with a way to wound the sacred feminine in this inverted aspect, it had to be done in such a way that theft, taking the power, had to come by agreement. And that agreement was an agreement of entrapment that happened where the women were either made into a sacrifice or willingly sacrificed their life under the guise of becoming a priestess for the order of the patriarchal dominions and principalities, the inverted aspect of the demiurge. And
those were like the ancient gods as well?
Yep, those were like the ancient gods after the fall. So when that occurred, you had essentially very few options. If you were a female who was an original fire goddess, the option was become a priestess. Either way, you were going to be sacrificed. And the agenda was to steal the power of the sacred feminine and have the masculine, the inverted masculine take the essence and use it for themselves.
For creation, whatever they wanted,
within their inverted agendas. Because these are all aspects of that inversion. So women were either made obsolete and objectified, and the ones that were the original essence, the original fire goddesses, they were basically given the only option of sacrifice, either through ritual or a lifetime of becoming a priestess, which was in actuality prostitution
Yeah, and their preparation process as well,
Yes.
which I know that we want to go into because of the, let's say, the ancient gods, or at least the fallen ones. They were big, right? They were giants.
Yes.
And so there was also a preparation process for the priestesses who were smaller human females,
Yes. Yes.
who had to prepare themselves physically to be able to even take on these giants in
Mhm.
these ritual
Mhm.
matings,
Mhm.
and how
Yeah.
that happened to actually sacrifice them as well.
Yeah, and that's later because this didn't that didn't occur until later. Just to give people a better perspective of what led into that. And to discuss how most of the entire world was divided into various cults and various cult orders, which back then would have just been religions in their day, where the women were seduced into believing that they were offering their lives to their god in their memory. So it was a manipulation also based on the fact that they didn't remember anymore very much. Mm-hmm. Because if you remember who you are and what you have, then you're likely going to be right. Yeah. So if you fought against this, then you would just be sacrificed, because they can procure your essence through sacrifice itself. They don't want to. They would rather harness you and keep you alive and continue to do so as a priestess whore. Mm-hmm. And these cults continue to this day. This is thriving very well.
Yeah. Especially the menstruating women. They want them to keep menstruating as long as possible so they can use them as well.
Yes. Yes, because of the blood. So often they'll tweak the body artificially so that the body continues to bleed more so than what's even normal. They do a lot of things. Now, eventually what happened with this inversion and the fall of the gods themselves, they began being hybridized through mating. So you then have different demigods, I guess you could call throughout the ages, connected to the originals. And these demigods, with each lineage that happened with each hybridization, they lost their original gold essence.
Yeah. Let's talk about the gold essence. And I don't know if this is preempting what you were going to say, but like in that ancient Gods of Egypt movie, they actually showed these gods who were giants that when they were injured, they did bleed gold blood. And so that was actually based on some truth that actually they did have gold blood, and then how that basically died out, or how it was maybe hybridized into certain lines, or even with certain or if that came from the original goddesses.
Eventually that bred itself out. So with each lineage, with each generation that they mated with different women, human women, and also, I mean, the mating that was going on was just all over the place. So you have many different types.
And then hybrids of that as well.
Yeah, and eventually that was bred out. Although the traits of the gold essence still remain, which is the fire essence, which is the Fireblood. Mm-hmm. So those traits are still there for those that are of those original bloodlines. As for the rest, they were very, very hybridized, which led them to create inverted rituals.
Okay, inverted rituals.
To mimic aspects of the hijacking.
Okay.
That they had to utilize in order to acquire and reobtain those original powers that were lost, because with the fall, they lost more and more of their essence, and they lost more and more of their power. And just like we know of the quote fallen angels, for lack of a better way to call angels, I don't know what we have to put in its place, but I'm just going to say angels. Now, the fallen angels, once that occurred, and that was also um, an inverted fall. So the fall itself, they lost their abilities and their powers from their original estate. Their original estate, they would have had their abilities in that pristine essence. But once inverted, they needed to find, it's like us using technology to mimic our natural abilities, right?
Okay.
So you need to find a way to access the powers that are hidden. So you have to do it in an inverted way. So where we use technology, they used, quote, these rituals, which were a technology, in order to access the original essence. And this is where a lot of the priestesses that were taken, which were of the original blood, the original fire, gold essence, which is where the blood of the rose comes from.
Okay. That's the starfire blood of the rose.
Yes. They were the ones that were sought out and hunted from the beginning, and they were put into priestess orders.
Okay.
These priestess orders continued and thrived throughout the entire world. They took them in as children.
Okay.
So that they didn't know any better, that was just normal life. Actually, you being taken in, which means actually you were taken in for a sacrifice, that was what was expected. And that was actually considered to be an honor.
Yeah.
And that is one of the ways that everybody was mind controlled and brainwashed into believing that if you had daughters and you were of those lineages, it was the greatest honor to give your daughter to, quote, the gods, to do a service.
And they were raised since children, just like a little young kid in monasteries, for example. You would give them over to the priestesshood, and they would learn different things. And you might want to talk about that, unless it's too early to talk about.
They were primed. And now this continues to this day. It's different. And there's certain secret orders that continue doing it the way that they were doing it back then as well. But there is, quote, an accepted worldwide order, if you will, that continues to do this with women who willingly give themselves up over to men, even if it's through marriage, under the guise of marriage, under the guise of whatever. But in essence, these women are the ones that carry the blood, and they're being set up to be with specific men who themselves are connected with associations like NASA and
powerful men, but they become powerful through them.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that's how they set it up.
And they're being used again, right? This is like they're being used as priestesses, but they're whores.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of even goes into the linguistics that you had talked about before, where we talked about the secret space program. And, and the, I mean, I'll just bring it up now because when I was growing up, I had TV shows that I liked to watch or that were on in the 70s or whatever. And one of them was I Dream of Jeannie. And that was like a classic programming for, let's say, a woman who's a priestess whore to become like a genie to serve the master who's part of NASA, you know, and all her powers would go into this NASA secret space program. And now when I look at it, it's like this is classic programming to groom people who probably were in secret space programs and to give their power away and think like, you know, it's like it's a good thing, like they're a genie and they're magical and they're seductive. But when you look at it now in hindsight, I can see how these things were used as programming probably for a lot of people who were actually raised in secret based programs and MKUltra and all that.
Absolutely. And the woman it doesn't have a clue for the most part. I mean, oftentimes she'll figure it out when it's too late, but she's being harnessed just like Jeannie.
She was in a bottle, stuck in a bottle, and
and he would pull her out when he needed her, and then she would do her
thing,
her magic.
And just like the Bewitched show, too.
And just like Bewitched.
And the Flying Nun. Remember all these? Giving their power away to some priest or to some NASA guy or to some dim bimbo or whatever guy. It's kind of funny when you think about it now, like the programming.
And actually have that, like that norm. Like that is normal. So you're serving a master.
Mm-hmm.
It's always male.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And
Yeah.
she's giving it all away under the guise that she's honored.
Yeah.
What an honor that, you know, my essence is basically going to be used up because I'm in this marriage, or I'm connected to whatever, or I've been hired in this company, you know.
Yeah.
It's being used. They're doing it on all those levels. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
isn't
I mean, it's still
anymore.
going on today, even as it was in the old days. But I think in the old days it was more ritualized and made sacred.
Yeah.
But it's really the same kind of thing is happening today and in different ways.
In different ways.
And,
Well, back in the day, because it was a part of their religion and the way that everybody lived, where there was, you know, they had their sanctuaries everywhere. And the priestesses would be housed within the sanctuaries untouched by anybody else,
yeah,
right?
they would live amongst themselves almost like a harem, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And they would be utilized for their power. So people would seek certain of them out for prophecies. But they were not.
Remote viewing, psychic
Remote
reading.
viewing, and they were
Yeah.
not allowed to be touched
Mm-hmm.
until such time that they were given over to the certain ritual sacrifices, where we're going to talk about this one, which is the big one, where they were inserted
Oh,
with.
okay. This is the it's, I don't want to call it a mock-up ritual because it's based on what really happened
Yes.
in the old days with the giants, where they had to prepare these priestesses for sexual contact with these giants who were much larger than them, and that actually would hurt their bodies, and they had to prepare their bodies. Well, you tell about that part, and then I'll talk about what was reported on the other one.
So originally, this ritual was something that was being done by these giants who are based, well, they're the origins of the Nephilim, and beings that were the hybridized offshoots of the original.
Offshoots, yeah.
So they did this ritual with women priestesses, core priestesses, who were of the essence of the original blood, where they would have intercourse with them. But the act of intercourse was so severe because the giants were so huge that it would
rip them apart.
It would rip them apart. But they had this down to a science. So knowing this, they would impregnate the priestess because they wanted the priestess to bear the hybrid.
Yeah,
because
she had the creative power to actually create the hybrid being. Because if she didn't have that fire, I don't think they would be able to create the right kind of hybrid.
No, she couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So that's why it was very specific. It had to be this our lineage, our blood lineage, basically the starfire, in order to survive this, even genetically. So genetically speaking, the genes of these hybrid offshoots from the original gods, it could be assimilated with, because the starfire is capable of creating. So they knew that it would be something that would essentially still tear the body apart. So the ritual was done in such a way that the priestess would be primed from the time that she was a child, and they would prime her body to accept this manner of this invasion that was know, brutal.
They would stretch her out, basically.
And they would not really tell her exactly what was going on,
or that she would even die,
or that she would die in the process, but that she would die in the bearing of the child, because this was all secret. So once she was impregnated by the giant hybrid, then they would keep her basically in a lying position for the entire time of pregnancy, because she was torn to pieces, but she could still gestate the fetus.
have a question, but I don't know if I want to break the line of thought here. But was the gestation of 9 months, or was it
Unnatural?
shorter?
No,
It was shorter.
It was short. It
Yeah,
was a lot shorter. Also, which was a good thing because her body wouldn't be able to endure 9 months. So, but because of the nature of the hybrid giant we were talking about, the gestation period's a lot quicker, a lot sooner, and even once the baby's born, the baby kills the mother at birth. So that's that. It's just the mother doesn't survive it, and then afterwards that hybrid
is raised up,
is raised
collectively. Very quickly.
But it actually grows very fast, so it doesn't have any of the normal stages that we're accustomed to seeing. It's totally accelerated. But the priestesses who did this part of the ritual was kept private, so that even the other priestesses who didn't know.
No, they didn't even know.
So this was a complete mystery to them, and the child that was birthed, that was taken into a different part of the order, and that these are how these hybrids were raised in secret. And then they were raised to do the same rituals to the other female priestesses.
And weren't you saying before that if the offspring was a male, they wanted to keep the females and kill the males, or was it
the females they wanted because they
could have babies and use them again.
So they could use them again. If they bred a male, depending on if it was a male that was just like the hybrid offshoot, then they would segregate them so that they could do the same thing. But if it wasn't that, then they would kill them. So it had to be, because of the genes, the way that the genes work. If it was a male and it had too much of the female, then that would be a split. So they would kill them. But if the male had most of the genes that came from the hybrid offshoot giant father, then they would grow him so that he would do the exact same ritual to the priestesses. But if the male ended up with too much DNA from the mother, then they would kill it.
Is that because they'd be too powerful?
It'd be too powerful, and they would,
or they could turn against their own kind, right? So Superman, right? The myth of Superman.
So that's what they were doing, and eventually, over time, the giants, they weren't here the way that they were at that point, but those rituals were still being simulated. Only they had to find a different way to do it, and this is where we look at other parts of the invasion where we get the parasite.
So that somehow ties in, because let's say I'm going to call it the mock symbolic ritual, which was reported to me by someone as a memory, was something similar, but it was an ancient Egyptian thing where they were a priestess in a harem of priestesses kept privately, and then one was called up for the ritual, and it was like surprise, and then when that ritual happens, it's basically a mock union with, let's say, a giant, but instead of a real giant, they have, let's say, a male dressed in almost like warrior attire that's all gold, almost like the ancient Egyptian gods in that movie, almost like a warrior, and then carrying a type of device that was like a symbolic piece of a giant penis, and all in gold and bronze, and like carrying it, and it had like two parts to it. One was a very large phallus that was like huge, right? It would have been, 18,
the front one.
I mean, it's like like how it would have been for, let's say, the originals, and then it had a part that went into the vagina that was also gold, that would be like a normal penis size, and then once they fit it in, it was like this man would come forward and then insert there's like two phalluses, actually, one that actually goes in the vagina, one that actually goes in towards the solar plexus, and it literally pierced the skin and goes right through the solar plexus, and when that occurred, according to the memory of the person, the larger phallus goes right in and pierces the skin and goes into the solar plexus, and then it inserts up into her through her energy center, actually could be through the esophagus and the stomach, where it inserted actually a parasite being that actually came out almost like it was being used as an injection, like how they would use a syringe, how he would inject
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It injected a parasite that went up through her and then it actually came out her mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, she was in extreme pain. This is
Yeah.
basically ripping her apart, her body, and she's screaming. And then you could see the parasite was actually inserted up into her head and her mouth.
Yeah.
And that the parasite was actually a strange blue-faced type of serpent symbiote type of being.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that this is representative of something that even the ancient Gnostics had. And there's actually an image or a symbol on one of my articles. The Orus Ra has a archontic parasite article
Yeah.
where they had actually symbols of what would happen when they took on this Orus Ra parasite.
Mm-hmm.
And then it showed up like a symbiote in the brain, almost like a worm serpent thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's something like that, where there was actually a real parasite that was actually inserted through this ritual, that parasite would then actually kill the host and actually take over the host, and the host becomes it.
Yes.
And whether or not they were sacrificed, but the original person was gone, and the host parasite basically just took over the entire person. And
Yeah.
this person, the priestess, had no idea that this was even part of the ritual.
Yeah.
And basically they died and were shocked and terrified in that process.
Yeah.
So that's what I was shown. That was actually a mock ritual of what maybe the original parasiting thing that happens, because
Mm-hmm.
in the alien abduction literature, and I know I'm getting off on a tangent
No,
here,
that's
but
fine.
there is a thing that connects with what I call the alien parasite life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that Dr. Corrado Malanga put very clearly in his earlier work. It's probably on the internet still, where he even actually did a diagram that within the first 6 days of an alien abductee's life, when they're still an infant,
Mm-hmm.
this alien parasite, he called it the active alien memory. And it could be different types of aliens that maybe, let's say, a reptilian or an alien gray or a mantid or whatever, or Orus Ra.
Mm-hmm.
And that thing is embedded inside the consciousness between the spirit, soul, and mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like a program that is actually vivified by the spirit life force of that baby. And then that parasite consciousness now lives in them. And that I don't think they're really fully aware, because they become it, or it becomes them, if they don't really wake up.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking something like that has happened in the old days, except this is
Yes.
much more dramatic. It was more like, a symbiote, a parasite that basically took over the entire body and then took them over and became them and then assimilated the human form. But it was a complete takeover type of thing.
Yes. I absolutely. A lot of this was happening from the beginning in terms of the technology that was around with these entities that found a way to be in our
system. So our system doesn't recognize it as a foreign invader. And this actually goes into some of what was discussed on another a website that I did an article on, called The Reptilian Replication Process, based on a Carolyn Hamlet interview and report, a satanic ritual abuse bloodline person, and how the reptilian replication process does it in such a way that we don't recognize it as foreign. And so they could introduce basically a stem blood cell of a reptilian, and then it comes and imbues itself in our DNA and in our cells, and then its consciousness and its whole package is in there, and then it can live in us and take over our behaviors and our thoughts, much like the alien parasite of Dr. Malanga. So it's something similar. And there's also something else that if we go back a few steps, when we talked about the mock ritual of the giant phallus and the parasite that is embedded through, it's similar to what, I know it sounds gross, but the Donald Marshall talks about the vril.
Yes.
And the vril was a type of really grotesque alien being, reptilian, that's actually smaller, and it's not a very large being. It's only maybe 2 or 3 feet tall. And he has some pictures on some of his websites. But the vril, in his situation of a parasite takeover, it has a proboscis that comes out and goes through the eye. And then it releases some kind of enzyme that dissolves the brain or the nervous system in such a way that it can take over that consciousness. And there's actually a 3-month process or so that where they're like have to be hospitalized or something before this whole thing like takes over the consciousness, and then they're like full on hosts of this like vril thing. So, and I don't know if what this other person reported to me is the vril thing, because it wasn't through the eye. It was literally through the solar plexus and went up, and it came out like the mouth, or maybe it went up in the brain. It was like a symbolic representation.
There was a show that was made called Stargate,
Yeah, I remember that.
where they used the symbiote, which was called a Goa'uld. A
Yeah,
Goa'uld.
gold.
A
Yeah,
Goa'uld. And it's based on this, which I feel
they
that
must know, right? Yeah,
the show Stargate is based on fact.
yeah,
Um, it's not a sci-fi fantasy. It's actually all, absolutely based on what's real. So that is probably a really good indicator of how this parasite does work in the system and take over the consciousness,
yeah, yeah,
which is also something that's been utilized in technology as well to be able to do this synthetically, which the reptilians have done through
yeah.
their own
That's right.
DNA,
That's right. Yeah,
because it has a lot to do with the ability for you to absorb it like it's your
yeah.
own.
And that's actually explained through the Carolyn Hamlet article, which actually is no longer on her blog, but I had copied and pasted and put it on an article where I talk about the 11-step process of the reptilian replication process, which it only requires a single red blood cell, which is a type of stem cell, to do what they do to put it in, like I say, a fertilized ovum.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can basically be a reptilian hybrid through that process alone. Snaky body kind of
Yeah, they described it as blue, and
yeah,
when I drew the picture of it, we should like
yeah.
try to.
Do you still have it? You still have it. It was a crazy
I do
picture.
have it. I do have it somewhere,
Yeah,
because I've seen these before. We'll include it later on, but what you were saying about the reptilian DNA is very interesting, because it's a
yeah.
DNA that can easily replicate, and it can easily blend.
Regenerate as
And
well.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it blends with other
yeah,
types of DNA.
yeah, yeah.
So
Other life forms as well. Yeah,
right. So this is almost the perfect base DNA for any kind of hybridization.
and they called it twinning, by the
Yeah,
way.
it's twinning, because
Yeah,
when you have just the same way as twins in a uterus that are separate, but they don't recognize one another as separate. They essentially see each other as the same DNA, although they're separate. So the reason why this reptilian DNA replication is called twinning is because once that attaches itself to the other DNA, then it doesn't recognize an invader.
no.
It takes it in as though it's itself. So an overlay happens. And
Yeah,
the overlay of that reptilian DNA basically blueprints itself onto
mhm,
the original DNA. And
yeah,
there you have like a perfect hybrid that
yeah.
starts creating itself. So they don't need to do anything super elaborate to create hybrids when
No,
people are um, getting pregnant. They
no.
don't have to wait. They don't have to do anything super technological. It can be just
Yeah,
inserting a
a
cell
single blood cell. Yeah,
right in there. So, and that's that. It does the rest on its own.
yeah,
And this is the way also for them to take over the not only the DNA but the consciousness,
hmm hmm
because now
yeah,
you've got essentially a consciousness that is the reptilian, and you've got the human consciousness, or whatever the blood type of that person
yeah.
is.
It sounds similar to basically what's happening with the, let's say, the archontic mind, which is, I know the Carlos Castaneda had his own way of describing it, the 4-inch installation, which it's really not the way they explain it, but it's like it exists in us as our mind, as our ego, as the thoughts and the conceptual mind, which is really the overlay. And
Yes.
it's really not the true essence of what we are. We really are not of that, but we imbue it as if it's our own because we don't recognize it as other.
Right.
You know, unless someone's in an advanced yogi state where they're going from that original essence from moment to moment, and they're not even on a conceptual framework, which is rare, you know.
It's just absorbed. It's absorbed and it becomes its own. That's why, to be able to distinguish, and let's just say a hybrid that is birthed like this grows up and looks human, because this is really what they want. They want to be able to take over you with their overlay and their DNA, so that you're actually functioning on that other, but you look exactly like a human. Because if, and this is also a purposeful thing with what parts that they insert even in that red blood cell, because they don't want hybrids that have too many of their traits in the front line.
Would they be shape-shifting too much?
Well, they'd be shape-shifting and they'd be super strong.
Yeah.
They'd have all of their positive traits, which would
they
be
wouldn't obey. They wouldn't obey commands.
Right.
They wouldn't follow orders. They'd be, rogue.
Yeah. So it is a science the way that they do it, in terms of what aspects are put into that, even that drop of DNA, of that drop of blood.
Yeah.
We know exactly what is going to be accentuated and what's going to be lowered. So,
wow.
Because essentially they want to control you. They don't want you to have all of their great assets so that you can fight them.
No, because they want you to be controlled, a good robot or a good slave. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up to actually vindicate what you said in terms of the rapid gestation process of the true hybrids of the giants, that in the Carolyn Hamlet case, which is no longer on her blog site, but she talked about a fifth fire initiation, twin flame initiation ritual, what was done by actually her handlers, a male and a female who were considered twin flames. And they did a ritual where it was an irreversible ritual once they did the union and gave up their own souls for this higher being, whoever the hierarchy they were bringing through. And then they created the portal. So this being called Rommel, she called it an Arcturian, but it's really a type of fallen angel. It's a different type of hybrid. So when it came through and the woman got pregnant and she had the child, I think grew up in like 5 months. I mean, the pregnancy was rapid and it grew very rapidly also after it was born into an adult. And so it's a completely different kind of human being that's a hybrid of a different species. And that they are creating these, and there's still an ancient thing going on.
Yeah. Remiel. It's part of the Nephilim programming.
Yeah.
That and the Nephilim programming is something also that the government has been utilizing as well.
Yeah.
Because
but this whole thing about I mean the parasite aspect, like there's a hybrid aspect, and then there's the insertion of the parasite while this union is taking place, because it reminds me of what happens, what's been reported with, quote, the new predator and some of these dark side of Cupid false twin flame love bites, where they're having unions with this twin flame, and it could be just on the astral level, it doesn't even have to be on the physical level. But after they do this a number of times, they become basically infected by a number of entities or other things that imbue their energy field permanently unless they clear. And so it's like a parasite gets transferred through. It's like portals are opened up even in the astral where these things come through, and they're basically like infected with a parasite.
Absolutely. And they're being used so that when they are uniting, they are creating essentially a portal of creation whereby they're birthing an avatar, so to speak, of what this parasite needs and is. So they're actually birthing this on the other levels. They may not see it on the 3D. Yeah. But if you're on the other lower astral realms, you'll
actually a being is created on the astral.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And then see, once that happens, that can become a symbiote.
Oh.
And then that is what can be inserted in the 3D.
Oh, I see. As the being.
As the being.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. There's all kinds of strange stuff going on.
Yeah. This is why they want twin flames, and they want people to have such strong connections so that they can be bridges to be able to do this.
Well, they need us as portals, right?
A
Because
lot
they
of
have the ability to bring it through. There's something about the original God code, which she
yes.
talked about in her article,
Mhm.
enables that and opens the portal. Because actually, our womb as a woman is a
Yeah.
portal. It's a natural portal already, like a womb.
Yeah, it's the meta code.
Yeah.
And you will see that throughout the black magicians and throughout the history of some of these hidden cults. They've been utilizing this as a technology
Wow.
secretly to create, armies of this kind of
Yeah.
thing, as well
Wow.
as to infect those here with that life form, which takes over you consciously, so that once it takes over you, just as an example, look at some people who have been involved in some of these cults who are taken over by something.
Yeah.
And they feel it. So on other levels, they're giving birth to something else because they usually are connected to the new predator, who is an agent of infection,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
whereby they're hosting this new life form
Oh, wow.
that can come in and take over. And then that networks with the other one. So before you know it, you get basically everybody having a web mind, or a
Yeah. Interconnected mind.
interconnected mind,
Yeah.
where they're all herded essentially into that original parasite entity, that original, God.
The
On that.
original octopus god with
Right.
tentacles everywhere.
Sure. So these things aren't infecting, and they do germinate, and they can plant eggs in you.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
can.
And I remember that was a report that I had from someone, and it was also something that I recognized indirectly through some of the Carlos Castaneda statements that he made in some of the books. I don't remember which one, but it was also in the Amy Wallace biography of her life with the cult itself. And it's something that he said about, I don't know if he used a sorcerer or a Nagual, that Nagual's sperm is special because
The Nagal,
it actually embeds these golden egg things in her womb, which are like the infected things that take root as these like little. I know that I knew another psychic healer. His name was Franz Ertl, and he still does work. He's a German.
Yeah.
But he actually noticed these things through his healing process, that there were things that would embed themselves like eggs, but then they would hatch into these like worm-like serpent things that would actually mature inside as a type of entity that was like a serpent inside.
I've had clients with
It
that.
almost reminds me of what like even in that ancient Gnostic thing where they show the snaky thing inside the head, and that the womb actually is deposited with these like golden egg things, but they have these little serpent things inside that they actually hatch to create more of whatever that parasite is. And this is something that was actually described by one of my people that's in the Dark Side of Cupid book. It was the original sex dragon case, Cora and Wiz, where the woman who was she was the one who was actually the host, who actually, I mean, it was a pretty wild case, but she actually had some kind of, oh, it's so bizarre. But anyway, he described once she had sex with him, and it was like an infection thing that happened in his solar plexus. It was as if a bunch of like spider-like things were like released inside of him. And he went through almost a period of insaneness for a while, and not being grounded and being very drained, and like, it was very, very unusual, but it was as if something was released, like a bunch of spiders. Like, you've ever seen a spider egg, like when a mama spider lays eggs and it's like this thing, and then you hatch it and all the baby ones just go all over the place?
Yes.
It was like that, except it's in some kind of astral energetic form.
Yeah. Well, because it happens. I had a client who had an infestation in his body of these, literally.
And was it from a reptilian situation?
Millions and millions. And
wow.
and actually, the thing is, if it can be to the point where it manifests physically that you are defecating them.
Oh, wow, I've heard that.
It can do that.
That's a rare thing, but I've heard that.
Depending on the level of infection and how much you're bringing it through on this level, it can come out. Like, it can come out in various, it can come out of your eye.
Interesting, because in the Carolyn Hamlet article, when she's talking about the Reptilian itself, because it's a type of hybrid being that exists on both 3D and 4D, it has those qualities.
Yes.
So it has that quality where you can actually get this thing astrally, let's say 4D, and then it can manifest 3D. So you can have some of this crossover happening.
Yes, absolutely. No doubt about it. But they knew all of this in ancient times. They knew exactly how to bring all of these in and how to have them gestate in a human body, which bodies were the best. They knew exactly who the ones with the original fire, with the original gold fire lineage. They knew all of this. So this is, if anything, there has been a wash down throughout the ages, and it's become more secret. Some things have become more secret and other things have become more global, as in we'll have you as a female who has all these gifts prime you through the media and through just what is naturally around you to have you do it yourself, so that you groom yourself to be a priestess.
Or a priestess whore.
Or, well, when I say priestess, I mean whore.
Yeah, yeah. And
so,
yeah.
Because that's what's happening.
Then they're set up with men who are in, let's say, high positions, but they're actually using them to imbue them with the creative energy, the power, and then like their career will take off a lot of times once they link in with a particular woman. And then there's the reverse thing that also happens, because I heard you report this with other cases where I've heard it reported too, where actually the woman was more of the vampire part.
Yes, and then the male,
the man like went
the
down.
male dies.
Yeah, they die, or like, and I've heard this from. I heard so many stories, but like if they have a lot of wives that repeatedly die, let's say if they've had many wives and like every single one of them like dies of a weird disease, then you start to wonder, like, is there something weird going on? You know. Like the Black Widow or Black Widower, you know. But you know, I've heard
on
stories.
An energetic level, where they unite with this person, and then that person doesn't last long, or they start really
they get sick.
They start weakening. You can start seeing changes, and oftentimes they'll die. I've seen both situations where I've seen the woman is the new predator, and she's hosting the life essence of the male. And I've in a situation oftentimes too, I find it really fascinating because there are these Native Indian chiefs who have a lot of the original essence in them, and they're usually targeted.
Well, anybody with a lot of essence is automatically targeted. We've seen this over and over again. It's like you don't know who you are. I mean, they know who you are before you know who you are. And you can find out by how come you keep being set up with these like predator creeps, you know, who are like black magicians or whatever, and they're targeting the originals. You know?
But you will see symptoms related to this phenomenon, because just as in the past, as soon as the priestess whore was initiated into ritual, you could see that there was a really fine time in terms of accessing the most of her energy, because it was a small window.
Oh.
So she was groomed and primed from the time she was a child for that. But then once it was initiated, there was a fine window of energy because they were siphoning the life essence.
Wow.
And you could see symptoms with it. So in the cases of what we were describing, where they were utilized to bear these hybrid giant offshoots of the original, of one of the original types of gods, what we see is that they knew that the life essence only had so much maturation before it would expire because of the utilization. Cults know also when they have someone what they can do. So if they choose to use you in sexual ritual magic, it has a different consequence on you energetically than if they keep you pure that way, but they utilize your powers.
Oh.
So it's different depending on how they want to harness you and use you. So often what's happening globally, just on its own, you're seeing this rise of all of these women who are doing this, are
Yeah,
being used.
and they're thinking it's an honor, and then
Mhm.
they have no idea how they're just being used, really.
Yeah.
And the thing is like, you always have to wonder, like, well, why are these Tibetan Buddhist practices, ultimately, a lot of the yogis practices, the males, for example, they're one of their highest, they want to reach enlightenment, right?
Mm.
But that's a whole process that takes place. And one of the processes that they hope for is to get in touch with a dakini, who's
Yeah.
like a feminine teacher that will help him become enlightened, as well as some kind of tantric union that helps him. And you have to wonder, well,
Sexual tantric
why do they need
union.
that?
Yeah,
Like,
sexual tantric union.
uh-huh,
Let's just be clear about this, because when we speak about the Buddhists, many people automatically assume that there's no sex involved. So,
it could be astral.
this is
Yeah.
something that really needs to be brought out and discussed, because I think that there's a lot of information being kept from everybody about this, because they want to be able to give people the impression that it's something pure. So they want to associate, just like the priestess whores, they want to have everybody associate the priestess with what's holy.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really want you focusing on the whore and how they utilize the priestess as a whore. So tantric sex ritual magic, it's a ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Now, two people who get together and have love and feel the love when they unite that way, it has the potential to create, and I'm not saying just create life here, I'm saying create life.
Create something else, yeah.
Create something else completely. Oh, hang on. The Tantra sexual ritual magic. Sexual ritual Tantra magic, which is utilized very much throughout. Evie, talk about a little bit.
I always thought it was interesting how, because I read a lot of Tibetan Buddhist hagiographies and studied Vajrayana and a lot of Ati Yoga and different things and shamanic practices. And I always found it interesting that the male yogis, even in advanced practice, they always had at some point really desired to meet a dakini. It's kind of like a goddess, like a goddess messenger who's an original type of being that's a messenger of enlightenment that would help them to become enlightened. And sometimes that may be a sexual interaction, depending on the situation.
For men,
as if they needed it, but the women, as far as I know,
don't
don't
need it.
necessarily need that. But I think women are being used to think that it's a necessary process of enlightenment with the whole Kundalini thing.
Yes, and it's not.
But I don't think it's necessary. I think that, I don't know if it was Rudolf Steiner or somebody else was talking about the Kundalini of the root up to the crown is actually the system you don't want to be involved in for a true enlightenment. You would actually want it from the top down.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it would be more like a ripple.
Yeah, you don't hear about that much, actually.
It would be like a warm ripple, that like a wave. If you imagine yourself feeling the water waves, and it's warm water, and it's like a ripple that is a little bit electrified, and it's warm going through, but from the head down, right? So
yeah, very interesting.
And this is really a way, that is more of a feeling that I call it. I don't know why they call it. I mean, I suppose they can call it Kundalini or whatever, but Kundalini is actually in reference to a serpent. So whereas that feeling to me is when you connect universally to everything. It's a feeling of connecting to the original essence, the source itself, and how it's actually regenerating you as it goes through, and that is opening you up in that original essence. But the reverse, which would be to me the inverted version of the hijacking, which uses sex and uses tantra, like tantric sex, which is inverted. It's the inverted way of trying to access the power, whereby mostly men seek it out, especially with these these tribes or these cults or these organizations that have made essentially a religion out of it. But yet we know that from the very beginning, women never needed to do any of this.
Yeah, or maybe the original goddesses had that quality in them, and that might have been why there was so much jealousy and the desire to subvert and dominate, was because they had a kind of original power and intuitiveness in this the spirit realm. Because even in the Taoist alchemical process, where they're wanting to get back in touch to the primordial Tao, which is the non-dual, they go through the yin side. And so you definitely have to be balanced with the yin and the yang, but you go through the yin side, which is basically the aspect that women have more yin.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's easier for women to kind of connect with that side, or have more of an ease with the intuitive psychic aspect. Because I don't know if you found that out, but in terms of psychics, the best psychics who are aware that I have met have been female. And I'm sure there's some really good male ones, but females in general, I think, are a little more natural at it. There's more of a naturalness.
Because the fact that the female can create means that the female's already a stargate. She's already a stargate of creation, literally. So that connection is a connection on all levels. Now, when the inversion happened in the fall, which meant that it inverted the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine, then you have an imbalance of power, because one is still a creator. One is still a stargate. One is still a portal. One is still a bridge. So then became a desire to want to be able to take that. So if you unite and do this, let's say with somebody you love, that's fine. That's a sacred union. But when you have an organization or a religion or a cult or a group of people who want to take this power over, and
they do it for the cult.
For the cult, that is black magic. That's a part of the inversion. That is like theft of essence. That is theft of your being. And this is the same as whoredom. This is the same as, priestesses who are being utilized as whores, under the guise of, we'll call you a priestess.
Yeah.
You know?
So you'll feel good about it.
Yeah.